Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Alicia Powell Gillis, and I am the Senior Editor at Route 50. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast, Secure Voting in the New Normal, State and Local Election Security Strategies, underwritten by Okta. Earlier this year, a Gallup poll indicated 59% of Americans don't have confidence in election honesty. When stacked up against the world's wealthiest democracies, this ranks us among the lowest when it comes to faith in elections. Today, we are sitting down with state and local leaders who are fighting to ensure the veracity of the vote. They'll share best practices and tactics to protect the 2020 election during this time of unprecedented disruption. Although the 2020 presidential election will look different from any other in modern history, the need to secure the vote is more important than ever. So now, let me introduce you to the panelists who will be exploring this topic with me today. First up, we have David Becker, Executive Director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. We also are joined by West Virginia Secretary of State, Mac Warner, Maria Barsayo Lynch, Executive Director of the Defending Digital Democracy Project at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard Kennedy School, and Michael Moore, Information Security Officer at Maricopa County, Arizona. Just a note to our audience, we were also scheduled to be joined by Arizona Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, but she was scheduled to, she had a last minute conflict and is unable to join us. But to our remaining panelists, I am thrilled for you to be joining us, and I'm sure this is going to be a very lively and timely discussion. So to get us started, I'm going to go around the horn and let each of you introduce us. So just tell us a brief background about yourself and just give us a sense of your role and or expertise in the election space. So I'll start in the order I introduced you. So David, you're up first.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm David Becker. I'm the Executive Director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. It's a nonprofit that works with election officials all over the country and all across the political spectrum to help them run elections that are efficient and accessible for all eligible voters. I've been in elections for about 22 years. I served for 7 years as a lawyer in the Justice Department's voting section and spent several years also working at the Pew Charitable Trust leading their election efforts.
Excellent. Secretary Warner.
I'm West Virginia Secretary of State Mac Warner, and I come from a military background, had a military career. Just ran for office 3 or 4 years ago. 2016, got elected, so I'm at the end of my first term. I really focused on election security from the cyber perspective, the Russian meddling, that sort of thing. Also focused on voter registration, cleanup of those lists and so forth. So we could talk about some of the progress we've made, how we've done that, and working with DHS and up the chain with regards to communications, both up and laterally, is a key to what we'll be talking about today. Thanks.
Maria. Maria, I'm not sure I'm hearing you. Are you still on mute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
I'm sorry about that technical glitch. Thanks for having me. In my role as the Executive Director of the Defending Digital Democracy Project, which is often referred to as D3P, we have the great opportunity. We're a bipartisan project. We've worked with hundreds of officials across the country since the project was founded in 2017 in the aftermath of the 2016 election. And our mission is really focused on helping decision makers in the democratic process understand how to best counter cyber and information attacks and provide recommendations and resources to allow them to do that. So we're excited to be here today. We've had the opportunity to write recommendations and playbooks on cybersecurity, collaborating with many of the people on this call and their teams, as well as conduct trainings in hopes of better understanding the evolving landscape of these threats in each of the election cycles we've had since 2016 and ahead of 2020. Thanks.
And Michael, to round us out.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Moore. I'm the Information Security Officer for the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. I've worked for Maricopa County for the past 12 years. I've been in information security for the past 6 years. I started with our general IT department and the information security department there. And in the past year, I've come on to the Recorder's Office. I am the one person on staff who my first consideration is information security. And I think that I'm somewhat of a rare thing currently to be an information security officer completely assigned and dedicated to an elections department. And that's something that I'd really like to change. I'd like to see pretty much every election department have someone like me.
Great. And Michael, towards the end, we'll definitely talk about that in terms of resources. So, but I'm going to stay with you, given your role, and I'm going to throw this question out to our entire panel. Is obviously it'd be understatement that there are concerns. People are concerned about this election. They're concerned about is it safe? Will it be secure? So, but some of those concerns may be based in to 2016, or some of them can be justifiable to today. So I'm curious to hear from you and your fellow panelists, just really what are the risks that people should be most concerned about, and what you are doing in your role to help mitigate those risks. So Mike, I'll start with you.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. So I would say first and foremost for me, the thing that I'm most concerned about is social media, both disinformation out there, as well as the potential for official accounts being compromised. So one of the first things that I did when I started with the department was communicate with our communications team. And, the questions are, what are our social media accounts? We need to lay those out. Okay, what are the links to all of them? Who has access to them? Where do you store the passwords, and how do you share the passwords for these accounts that multiple people need to access? And, as a result, one of the first things I implemented was a password management system, so we could have nice, long, complex passwords that a human never needs to remember, that we can easily change, that we can share securely, because, it is a very big concern of mine that one of our official accounts could be compromised and someone could use it to put out, it could be as benign as saying polling locations are closed, or you can't vote, or it could have racial slurs. Voter confidence is paramount. We cannot have these official accounts being compromised. And just super quick, for disinformation, we are tied in very closely with our county's information security team, as well as the Fusion Center for our state. So anytime we see anything out there on the internet that is just complete and total disinformation, we can report it up to our Fusion Center, and they can contact the government relations departments for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc.
Great. Secretary Warner, I want to get you in on this conversation too, and just kind of get a feel for you about what are the risks you're most concerned about, and what are you doing in West Virginia to mitigate against them?
Well, I think Michael hit the nail on the head with social media concerns. That seems to be the flavor of the day, that the Russians and other Chinese and Iranians, other bad actors are going to exploit. We saw that in 2016. I think a lot of us using the Belfer Center as kind of key to this, to pull a lot of us together and get that key information out. It gave us kind of a clearinghouse to go to, get things down. There was a little bit of a rough start with DHS initially after the 2016 election. As the former administration was leaving office, they named elections as critical infrastructure without a full explanation. And so for about a year or so, there was some tough territory, and that's where I think the Belfer Center did a great job of stepping into that. Since that time, that has been repaired, and in fact, DHS is a key component in all this as part of what I mentioned in the opening about the communication. That communication has to be from my office down to the county clerks. I have 55 county clerks. Many do not have that information, officer, that Michael was talking about. So we have to provide what guidance we can there. The Secretaries of State, the National Association of Secretaries of State, is a great clearinghouse as well now to share best practices between the secretaries as to what's working, what's not. And then DHS has really stepped in, and other 300 agencies, but mainly filtering through DHS, to not only provide us key information, classified information, that sort of thing, best practices, but allows us, if we see something, to get it to them so that they then can share it with others, give us a readout as to how concerning it is and what steps to take and so forth. So the real concerns are misinformation, disinformation, as Michael said, but that can come from other areas other than social media. we see an awful lot of actors, special interest groups, inserting themselves in between the voter and the county clerk. And whenever somebody else tries to enter into that arena, it's ripe for nefarious activity, or they may be gathering information for other reasons. And so I really emphasize, again, back to what Michael said, that key trusted source is that county clerk and the Secretary of State's office. Anywhere else you go to, if you're going to Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, anywhere else, Instagram, if you go into any of those sources, there's no way that they can keep up with all the changes in my state alone, much less 50 states and the thousands and thousands of election jurisdictions around the U.S. So I just emphasize, go to the county clerks and the Secretary of State's office for elections information. Thanks.
Thank you. And since the secretary teed you up, Maria, I'm going to actually go to you to not only kind of respond to the question of risk, but also to kind of, excuse me, to hear from your perspective on how you assist states and localities in the organization that you work for.
Thanks so much. And I will build on Secretary Warner's work. He is somebody who has been helping people better understand the mis and disinformation threat to elections for some time, and has done incredible work, and has also been a collaborator as we've been looking to provide recommendations and resources for officials ahead of this election. I think there are a number of areas that we have tried to provide support and resources for in the past year. One, we understand that the threats in this space involve, cybersecurity elements, and there's people and technology processes that are important to assess there. We also understand that information threats, like everyone who has talked so far has mentioned, is something that we are still really understanding. What do these incidents look and feel like? What is the broader scheme of these tactics? We just released the Elections Influence Operations Playbook for state and local election officials that includes kind of a way to, one, understand just a quick brief on mis and disinformation. We've decided to focus within the broader umbrella of these tactics around mis and disinformation incidents that have been seen to specifically target the election process and election infrastructure in a way that hopefully for election officials, they feel then empowered to better recognize and counter those threats, especially because they are targeting elements of their role in conducting the election. And then we have also looked at something Secretary Warner mentioned, the coordination effort, coordinating laterally, coordinating beyond the state with an effort we did in December called Battle Staff Boot Camp, where we tried to give recommendations about how coordination can support faster identification of various incidents and threats and coordination in their response. I think the playbooks and the trainings that we've done, we just finished a national training tour where we had the honor of working with officials across the country, conducting simulations for over 350 officials, reaching over 700 officials across 17 states. And we tried to look at these threat areas together, because many times election officials are also going to be experiencing cyber threats, information threats, and general operational threats that they encounter every election year at the same time. And hopefully some of the frameworks that we've worked with officials to think about how it would apply to jurisdictions of different sizes are helpful, especially with the threats that we understand to be predominant ahead of 2020, mis and disinformation being something we know is a threat that is happening right now before the election cycle, will happen during election day, and will happen after election day. And especially because we're still understanding more about those incidents, I think there's a big focus on them ahead of this election.
Thanks, Maria. And David, I'm going to bring you in on this too, not only to build on what's been discussed thus far, but also I recall Secretary Warner talking about where we are now versus where we were in 2016. So if you can kind of help, right size, like give us a little bit of like where we're better, where we've improved, where we're not so great, et cetera.
Sure, thanks. Well, all of the panelists are exactly right about disinformation probably being the greatest threat. I think it is absolutely the consensus of the intelligence community the Bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee, and other experts in the field that foreign adversaries and perhaps domestic actors are seeking to target the American voter for disinformation. And the goal of that disinformation is to reduce voter confidence overall in election outcomes and to delegitimize democracy, specifically American democracy, but also democracy worldwide. We see autocracies, Secretary Warner mentioned Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, all having goals along those lines to delegitimize American democracy in particular. And I don't think there's any question they've been enormously successful with their disinformation experts. We are seeing, as you noted, Alicia, that the rates of people who doubt election outcomes on both sides are pretty much at the highest we've ever seen. And I think we have to view it all through that lens. I'm seeing now we're 41 days from the close of voting. I don't call it election day anymore because probably well over half the ballots will have been cast before then. But I'm still seeing disinformation being spread on social media about the security of voting technology, about activities being performed by one or the other party's election officials. And the goal, and it feeds some of the concerns that people naturally have. It reinforces their belief. If they're Democrats, they believe Republicans are evil. If they're Republicans, they believe Democrats are evil. And it reinforces their belief that that there's something wrong going on, and further delegitimizes democracy overall. So that's a major concern. With regard to some other security issues, specifically related to infrastructure, I think it's important to note that we do have foreign adversaries that are seeking to, in some cases, infiltrate infrastructure. I think the goal of that is not to change votes. I think most people who are experts in this field recognize that is extremely hard to do undetected. They're not trying to swing an election one way or another by the changing of votes, but the activity of infiltrating election infrastructure could further delegitimize the election and reduce voter confidence, and we're seeing that to some degree. So there is some good news along those lines, and it's not. It has a lot to do with the work of some of the panelists here, including Maria and Secretary Warner. The good news is that 2020 is going to be the most secure election we've ever had, which is not to say it's perfectly secure, that it's unhackable. It's that whenever we use technology, there is no such thing as that. But in 2020, we now have probably about 95% of all ballots cast in the United States will be auditable paper ballots, including almost every single ballot in every single battleground state. That's really important. In 2016, for comparison, only about 75% of all ballots were paper, and some battleground states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, had significant numbers of non-paper ballots that were not auditable. We are going to have more audits of those paper ballots than ever before. Georgia and Michigan have already had plans in place, and I know other states are going to announce them too, to do their first audit statewide of all of those paper ballots. An audit confirms to a statistical degree of certainty that the outcome was correct. They have human beings reviewing ballots to confirm that. That's great news. We have more information sharing than ever before, again, thanks to a lot of the people on this panel and others who have made sure that information about threats from foreign adversaries and others is now being shared. There is now something called the Election Infrastructure ISAC, which is an organization that didn't even exist in 2016 and now comprises all 50 states plus about 2,000 counties or more, where they are sharing information about threats and being able to act on them, where we can see patterns along those lines. Where potential vulnerabilities, there are vulnerabilities with any system that has technology. Where we have seen vulnerabilities in the past is not, as I said, with the voting machines or with the tabulators, but we have seen attempts to infiltrate voter registration databases with limited success. Illinois had an infiltration, and possibly Florida to some degree. It might have been just at the county level, might have been at the state level. But there were attempts in many other states that were unsuccessful as well. And of course, the effort there is to further delegitimize elections, to get people worried about it. In Illinois in 2016, the Russian GRU successfully infiltrated the Illinois statewide voter registration database, and for about 2 weeks went undetected. They were accessing very small numbers of records. They weren't changing anything. But then all of a sudden, they turned the volume all the way up to 11, and they were instantly identified and recognized. It sucked up all the bandwidth in their system, and they shut everything down. And this is in the middle of July of 2016. And I've been asked many times, why do you think the Russians did that if they were sitting inside a voter registration database undetected? And the answer, I think, is relatively obvious. They wanted to be detected. It was right when the political conventions were about to start. They were probably trying to figure out why no one was detecting them and talking about it. And sure enough, people started talking about it and fretting about that. And the goal there, again, is to reduce voter confidence in the systems, in the professionals who are running elections. Now, we have some good news on that front, too. My organization, the Center for Election Innovation and Research, did a survey in 2018 and in 2020 on voter database security. And what we've seen is that states have vastly improved their security and resilience with regard to their voter databases. In 2018, we'd seen a substantial amount of improvement. In 2020, we see even more with much better security protocols to prevent any kind of intrusion, much better detection mechanisms such as things like Albert sensors, which I believe all of the states use to detect potential malevolent activity. And much better mitigation protocols to, just in case something does happen, do they have backups in place? Are those backups created daily or regularly? Do they test their backups? Those kinds of things are really important. You can go on our website, electioninnovation.org, and see the 2018 and 2020 studies. But the good news is we're more secure than we've ever been in 2020, even in spite of the threats. And we're going to have to be more secure than that in 2022. We're going to constantly have to improve security. We never cross a finish line. But I think voters can feel fairly confident, very confident, in fact, that when they cast their ballot, it'll be counted correctly.
Great. So I want to kind of, and I want to thank our audience who's already submitted questions, and to remind our audience that please go ahead and submit your questions along the way, because I will probably pull them as we discuss, like I'm about to pull this one. So since you have all alluded to the idea of misinformation being probably the gravest threat in this cycle, curious, a question that we've got from our audience member is, what can local, state, and federal governments be doing to prepare citizens for this? I mean, oftentimes they're probably not even aware that they are under a misinformation or disinformation campaign. So, and Secretary Warner, you were talking about how you really try to put out there that who are the trusted sources. So curious to hear from you first to see, how are you working to help citizens understand this and help them understand who are their trusted sources? What mechanisms are you using to communicate with them?
I think I'd like to emphasize 2 points here. One, to answer the question directly, it's through all the different means such as social media. It's doing talk shows like this, Zoom meetings, and so forth. I'm getting with as many constituent groups as I can, AARP, citizens groups, campaigns. We have a very active grassroots campaign here in West Virginia, and talking to those people, candidates, parties, conservative, liberal, progressive, whomever. So it's just getting out there, press releases, earned media. I mean, there's almost every day I'm engaging with the media in some fashion, a lot of times on talk radio all around the state. So I encourage all of that type of activity. But the second point that I'd like to emphasize is at some point, we really need as election officials to focus people's attention on what is and what the process of voting in your particular state, because 50 states, different laws, different timeframes, registration process, whether it's online, in person. So here in West Virginia, we're one of about 16 states that require a reason to vote an absentee ballot. And so, of course, with COVID-19, that provides the reason, the medical reason, at least under our state law. It doesn't in other states, okay? So another state may hear about what West Virginia is doing, that we're allowing everybody to vote absentee, and that may sound good in their state, but that may not be their state law. So at some point, and I think we hit that a couple of weeks ago, it was time to stop talking about the what ifs or what could be or what we're hearing in other states. People hear about drop boxes. Our state law doesn't allow us to have drop boxes. So the more that people continue to talk about that on social media, the more the hopes are up or something that They may install drop boxes. It's not going to happen in the next 41 days before this, as David said, the end of voting period. It's not going to happen in West Virginia. The time to take that up is at the next legislative session. If people want to move to vote by mail, we are not a vote by mail state. We're vote using the mail with the absentee process. So we have to keep drawing those distinctions for people. And I would encourage academia, media, everybody that's involved in this process at some point to start talking about, let's get the vote out. And so in West Virginia, let's start that absentee ballot application process. Let's educate people on the early voting process. Let's educate that all the precincts will be open. So if you want to wait until November 3rd to vote, you can, and you can rely on all 1,708 precincts in West Virginia being open. So you can go to your local school where you usually voted, because we're getting all the poll workers in place. That's the sort of information, the right information, that needs to be out there repetitively, because not everybody's listening to talk radio on one particular day. You have to say it over and over again to reach the entire audience. And that's why I would encourage our newspapers to get the information from the trusted source and then put it out there. And let's hold off until November 4th to start talking about changing state laws and what we ought to do next time around. This pandemic hit us right in the middle of the primaries. It wasn't time to change things then. We had to relax a few rules, such as we knew there was going to be this mountain of absentee ballots that were going to come in. Just to put it in context, West Virginia typically has about 7,000 absentee voters in a regular year. We have 224,000 absentee votes in the primary. So we had to adjust if we were going to have election night returns. And so what we did is we used to have to wait until election day to start the processing of those absentee ballots. So what we did is allow processing of absentee ballots during the early voting period, during those 10 days in the general election. It's October 21st, October 31st, and allowed the clerks to start checking the signatures, checking the registrations, opening the ballots up, having them ready, not counting them, but ready to go. So on election night, all they did as soon as the polls closed was ran those ballots through the high-speed counters, and we had election results probably faster for 97 or 8% of the races, faster during this primary than we did before, because we weren't waiting for all those precincts to bring those ballots in. We already had it in hand with the absentee ballot. So that's the sort of information that we need to be getting out to the public to provide that assurances, to build the confidence in the elections that David was talking about, rather than misinformation and disencouraging or causing people to lose confidence in the system. I know we've got it right here in West Virginia. I know my cohorts across the United States, there are going to be some challenges, perhaps in those vote by mail states where they've got to wait for all those ballots to come in. We're talking millions of them. Yes, they may not have election night results. So it is proper to warn America that we may not have full results on election day, but I can tell you here in West Virginia, I think we will. We only had 2 races that were extremely close that we had to wait until all those ballots came in. And we also had about 10,000 provisional ballots. And for a small state like West Virginia, that's an awful lot. We had to wait until all those were in to decide those last 2 cases. But for the most part, everybody was pleased. Media and voters alike were happy with election night results. And I think that's what you're going to see in probably 45 or more states across the United States on election night. David might have a better view on that than I do, or Maria. But I can tell you we're going to be in good shape here in West Virginia. Thanks for that.
David, was that you wanting to respond there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Secretary Warner said is just so important. It is, one of the things I'm still seeing in my social media feed is every day there's a white paper or a policy recommendation, or someone is trying to raise mostly illegitimate concerns about the voting technology or voting processes, things that can't be changed. We are 41 days from the end of voting. A change, even if a change was a really good idea, it would be a bad idea to implement right now because of the voter confusion that would result. And the election officials who are already dealing with unprecedented challenges, we're not only talking about foreign interference, but of course the pandemic as well. And those 2 things are layered on top of each other. As well as, by the way, we haven't really talked about this, there are going to be more voters voting in this presidential election than America has ever seen vote in any election in American history. We may see turnout at a level that we haven't seen as a percentage of eligible voters since the 1960s, or perhaps going back to 1908, which is the last time we had 65% of eligible voters voting. I don't know if you heard, my dog just agreed with me. So that is I think right now, especially for those members of the media who are writing stories, the best thing we can do is to assist voters in navigating the process. That should be our sole goal right now. There are going to be a lot of forces seeking to inject disinformation and other problems into the process, and we're going to need to really be aware of that and try to help voters navigate this process as much as possible.
So on that note, David, about help voters navigating the process, Michael, I want to bring you into this on the Maricopa County side, and how you're doing that, but also as both David and Secretary Warner mentioned that we haven't talked about is how the pandemic kind of has forced you to have to alter the way you all are working to provide information to the public. So I'll have you respond to that.
Thank you. And I think that David and Secretary Warner really hit the nail on the head there. When it comes to this disinformation, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? Make sure that you've got a communications plan. You need to advertise via traditional media, whether that's print, sending out mailers, being on the news, being on the radio, texting citizens, calling them, whatever it takes to educate them, get the truth, make sure that you have a positive relationship with your news agencies, that if they hear something that doesn't seem right, that they come to you first and they validate the veracity of statements and make sure that they're really getting what's true out to the public. And it's also two-pronged though, right? So there's the positive aspect of education, and then there's the, I guess you could call it negative aspect of hunting for that disinformation. If you have a communications team yourself, and or an information security team that you can reach out to, there are various tools and services that you can use to help you find what's trending out there. If someone posts something that's a lie and no one hears it, it's not very impactful. If someone has thousands of followers, that's something that's probably going to pop up on your feed. It's going to have a negative impact for your community. Like I said, there's various tools that can help you. Just take these search terms and hashtags, ranging from TweetDeck lets you set up a whole bunch of different Twitter pages for hunting, or you could pay for services like Brandwatch or Hootsuite. As for how COVID has impacted voting, Maricopa County has always had a very large permanent early voting list. I shouldn't say always. For the past decade, we've had a very large permanent early voting. It's been about 80%. I think we're upwards of 90% now. So it's a large increase. Some of the counties that I've spoken to were not in a similar situation. They had much less mail-in voting, and now they're having to deal with suddenly we're going to get 5 times the amount of mail that we're used to. What does that look like logistically? Make sure that you have staff on hand, both the quantity of people in case there's, unfortunately a second surge in coronavirus. Do you have enough staff if some of your staff get sick? Have you communicated out to your partners at the United States Postal Service? Just last week, we had a tabletop exercise that we brought a whole bunch of our partners to the table, both internal to the county, and we were able to bring representatives from the post office to go through various scenarios with us and let us know, why certain things wouldn't necessarily be a concern, and if ballots were sent to the wrong place or missing, like what they would do to be able to help us recover from a situation like that.
So, Mike, I want to pick up on 2 things you said. And the first is along the lines of if there's a resurgence of COVID. And Maria, I'm going to throw this to you because this is what you kind of alluded to is a question of resources. And we already know state and local officials, you already do not have a vast amount of research and don't have a vast amount of money, personnel. And for those jurisdictions who are extremely hurting from the economic consequences of the pandemic, they're probably even more dire straits. So given the whole concept of the limitation of resources, I'm just curious, and like I said, Maria, I want to throw this to you, is just knowing that, how can states and localities find where do they find the additional resources? How do they get the additional help? How can they better structure what they do have in a way that makes them not only capable but successful in fortifying the election process?
So I will start, but I know that my colleagues on this panel will have really helpful and practical tips on how to apply this. I'll start from where we sit, in that with recommendations, we are always mindful that there are jurisdictions of every size and that resources really vary widely. And so we try to keep that in mind in providing recommendations. With some of the topics that we've talked about so far, for example, kind of coordination elements, in our Battle Staff Bootcamp Playbook, we talk a little bit about how to set up your own kind of battle staff. And even if you're a small office, who should be there and who should you be communicating with internally? How can you use resources in terms of volunteers that might be able to be frontline, taking calls on election day or leading up to election day? And how can you staff responsibility so that you are able to preserve leadership, to be assessing incidents as they come in and making determinations about how to respond. With some of the conversation we've been having around mis and disinformation incidents, I wanted to briefly, I'll give some recommendations on kind of what do jurisdictions of different sizes could potentially do, and circle back to how we, as whether it's officials or those who are wanting to support officials, might think about that process. So I think with specifically information threats, communication is a very powerful tool. And like with cyber threats or other elements, the coordination is really important. So we have some thoughts about how you can secure your accounts. I love the examples that Michael shared around securing passwords on the Twitter accounts. So securing your channels and also connecting with people in your community, both in person, so by phone, exchanging business cards before election day is how somebody put it in a conversation I was having yesterday, but also via online. And even if you are a small jurisdiction and you don't have a full-fledged kind of communications team or social media plan, even being able to connect with with people who can help you validate your voice as a trusted resource for when you do need to make a response, that piece of it is important. If you're in a role where you want to make sure to support officials as they are sharing accurate information, I think you can, one, reach out to officials, know who you would be wanting to contact, and also help by reporting. If there are incidents that you're facing, make sure that you're able to report to that election official, because if they are, some jurisdictions have monitoring tools or are proactively monitoring in kind of really interesting and creative ways, like Michael mentioned, and others may not. So unless they are hearing or seeing on platforms that mis and disinformation incidents are occurring, your report might actually help them also be aware that something is taking traction. In terms of the question about resources, though, I do think, or my colleagues may have further ideas about how that really breaks down at the jurisdictional level. Our hope, though, is that with some of these frameworks, you can adapt them for the size of your jurisdiction, and collaboration for coordination and response, we have seen have a great impact no matter what size your jurisdiction is. If you're able to find channels to execute your response more quickly, that's what we've seen is something effective that any jurisdiction has the capacity to do.
Alicia, could I jump in on this at the moment? Just to follow up.
Yes, sir.
Follow up on what Maria said. I'd like to make a point or two. The first is that it's never too late to do the things that Michael has advised on the passwords and that sort of thing. Okay, so you can always rely on the IT professionals. And what I like is, I know that Dave Tacken in my office works very closely with Ohio, Colorado, and some others around the U.S. And so that communication is so key to pass what's happening, threats, how to counter them. So it's establishing those personal contacts. And unfortunately now with COVID-19, we're not able to meet in person as much, but meetings like this are absolutely essential to learn who are those professionals in the arena. And that's what I think, again, back to the Belfer Center, what they were able to do right at the critical time in 2016, when the federal government wasn't aligned to make those meetings happen. Harvard was bringing people up to Cambridge and allowing us to meet in person. And so my recommendation to everybody is that those connections are as important. The very first, there was a quote somebody said, if you're not embarrassed by your first product that you put out, you're not getting it out there fast enough. Some of the rudimentary things, and Harvard did a wonderful job, but they've continued to improve on those initial pamphlets that were put out. And we now see DHS putting out some very nice, comprehensive things, materials. Get those now. It's almost too late to implement some of those recommendations, and they're 41 days out. But get it so you're ready for the 2022 election. Now you have time after this, when November 4th hits, we start looking for the next election. Get those materials because it's absolutely critical. You can start to see DHS has started to use basically the case study method. Here's actual meddling by Russians or Iranians and Chinese. You now can see it, and when you see it, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen something like that. You start to relate to it much better. What we did here in West Virginia is we actually got together with New Jersey and pulled some of their COOP, their continuing operation plan, and then put together our own scenario. And what we did is we have it broken down in 3 categories. The first is natural disasters. So that would be fires, floods, things like that happen. Then there's category 2, which are unintentional issues. These are communication failures, power outages, hazardous materials spilled, those sorts of things. It's unintentional, but these things happen. Then the third are the ones I think most of us are talking about today, and that is the intentional threats. And that could be a hack, a ransomware attack, malware, active shooter, bomb threat, co-worker misconduct, things like that, where a human being is actually inserting themselves into the process to mess it up, to take away the confidence in the elections. And then we broke that down and have actual pages of each one of these telling you who to report it to, the phone numbers, state police. We have all this broken down. So it gives confidence in those 1,700 precincts around West Virginia. Each one of them has one of these COOPs, a continuing operation plan. So no matter what happens in their jurisdiction, they have somewhere to turn to. Now, none of us anticipated the pandemic, but the pandemic fit nicely into what we had learned at Harvard. When something happens, you may not have all the answers, but you need to be talking to the media to maintain that confidence that you're going to get them the answers. Harvard had put us through that. So all of our clerks now are very confident, or much more confident than they were before, to talk to the press, to give them the answers, and if we don't have the answer, that we're working on it. So that's the importance of attending these tabletop exercises, meeting the people, so when something arises and you don't have that expertise, you can turn to Michael Moore and say, hey, I've got this IT issue, help me solve it. Thanks.
Fantastic. And I just wanted to give David or Michael an opportunity to either respond, or in addition, the last couple of comments have been around coordination and collaboration. So just to get your thoughts on how can that be, how well that's going, not only just among state and local governments, as Secretary Warner was just alluding to, but in turn, but also with the federal government, because obviously they play an important role in this too. It's not just on the state and local side. So any thoughts on that from either of you? Michael, I saw you go up first, so you'll go first.
Yeah. So super quickly, it's unfortunate that Secretary Hobbs could not make today. I have a very close relationship with her department and the Information Security Officer counterpart over there, Ken Mata. He was actually at our tabletop that we had last week. We are a large county. We're the 4th most populous. We're like the 2nd largest voting district. We have lots of resources, and it's not enough to secure votes for only our own constituents. We have a responsibility to the state, to the region, to all of the United States of America. So whenever possible, we try to share our resources as makes sense. For example, next year, we're going to have a tabletop exercise that we're funding, that all of the election departments, all the counties in Arizona, we're going to invite them to the table and try to drill different scenarios, whether they're elections logistics, information security, IT related, and just to also piggyback off what Secretary Warner said, DHS and CISA are amazing partners. If you are low on resources, they offer many products and services in spite of the fact that we have the resources to reach out to vendors, which we do. We also use basically all of the products and services from CISA. I actually came from the CISA Summit right before this. They're doing a month-long series of 4 summits. So if you have the opportunity to check them out, it's obviously free of charge. They can speak to you both about election security and information security in general.
I'll just echo all that. I think one of the things that in this highly partisan time when it's really hard to look at the federal government in certain ways or state governments, particularly run by one part or the other. I mean, everyone has a very strong partisan opinion, but DHS and CISA in particular have been remarkable partners. I've heard that consistently from the states. It doesn't matter whether the Secretary of State is a liberal Democrat or a conservative Republican or something in between. They have been entirely credible, focused on the mission. They're bringing resources to bear, and the cooperation that's coming from between the federal government, DHS, CISA, down to the state governments, the Secretary of State's office, state election boards, and other state entities, down to the county level and local level for elections is the best it's ever been. I expect it will continue to get better, which is good news, but there's more information sharing, there's more sharing of best practices, there's more coordination than we've ever seen. That's going to pay off even in spite of the tremendous challenges we're currently facing.
Well, I want to make sure I get to our audience questions, and there is one, and since we were just talking about CISA, I think I'm going to bring it up here. So the FBI/CISA just warned about a wave of disinformation on election night, or maybe as David, you would say, at the night at the end of voting by bad actors via fake websites and social media. So is there a plan on how to push back? Can you win a disinformation war like that? And are there concerns about disinformation causing violence? So I'm going to throw that out to the group to see if anybody wants to take that very big question.
I can.
Oh,
I was going to say.
Okay,
I can
go ahead,
start.
Maria, then Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say I can start, and we'll certainly look forward to my colleagues' thoughts on this because it's certainly something that we likely are discussing daily in our work. So first of all, I think with the nature of influence operations, we know they're happening before, during, and after the election, and especially with this election and the factors of what may have changed in the election operation process. We see an effort from people working in this space to help voters understand that we may have results on election night. It may take longer to tabulate results. And that may be because there's an issue, everyone is making sure that votes are counted accurately and processed accurately given some of the changes this year has brought. We understand that looking at prior cycles, there could be a trend that post-election night timeframe might be a potential additional target for disinformation. And I could step back to you and mention that, within the broader kind of influence operations, we tend to look, at least in the playbook that we've just put out, at mis and disinformation together. So misinformation, it's misleading information that is spread mistakenly and unintentionally. And disinformation is misleading information that is spread deliberately and intentionally, often by malicious actors. When you are on the receiving end of this, whether you're an election official or a voter, you don't know if it's disinformation, you don't know if it's misinformation, you just know that it's an incident that is giving you information and you're trying to assess the accuracy of that information. We've seen around the election process that a good shorthand for thinking about disinformation incidents you might see around the election focus on the who, what, when, where, and how of how elections operate. So the who, the people involved in the election process and how those people may be targeted, or maybe somebody there are so many tactics, and that's the difficult thing about these types of incidents, that there may be authoritative voices that are trying to say this is information about the election that may not be the accurate person who is administering the election. The same thing holds true with examples like David mentioned around VRDBs, how the election process happens. So if you can think through both from an election official perspective, if I know that these might be targets on election day, how can I make sure to get voters information ahead of election day, like Secretary Warner is doing by looking at different kind of groups of voters around the state and just generally getting information out about the process. And if you're somebody who is seeing information and are not sure, make sure that you know who is administering elections in your jurisdiction. They are there to help make sure to protect the integrity of the election. And we hope that there is a network of people that will provide the support to election officials when they have to respond quickly and give accurate information in the face of inaccurate information to help them figure this out. Now, for post-election efforts, we've seen in our work that there are a lot of conversations happening across sectors to help understand what that threat looks like, whether it's helping the media better get a sense of the election administration changes and how that might change how we talk about the results. We actually just last week at the project released a election data set with the hope that it will be a resource, whether it's for media or other officials who want to provide further information with this post-election conversation in mind. And that data set tries to look at the different process factors for election administration state by state and provide kind of a all-in-one place where you can maybe fact check some of the information about processing. We are also still looking for feedback on that. It's a working draft document that we really welcome feedback on, in which we hope will be a good resource for what we expect will be a post-election conversation, unlike one that we've had in the past for the many factors that we've already talked about, given this year and what we know is different as we head to the election.
Thanks, Maria. Michael, I think you had raised your hand. Did you have a comment?
Yes, ma'am. Extremely quickly, just like Maria said, mentioning a network, it takes a network to beat a network. Can we win this disinformation war? Not alone. It's going to take a team. So make sure that you're communicating with your fusion center, or if you don't have one, DHS, FBI, local law enforcement. Make sure you're tied in with the government relations of social media. That way you can reach out to Facebook, Twitter, whatever, and get things shut down and ask them how they are proactively doing that on your behalf. As for disinformation causing violence, if anyone's not aware of it, like in Fairfax Fairfax County, Virginia, this past Saturday, there was armed protesters. So that's something that's at an election facility near where voters were. So that's something that's definitely of concern to us. Make sure that you're reaching out to your law enforcement and say on and around election day, what is our plan? Do you have an emergency contact list? Do you have your police department, your sheriff, whoever on speed dial ready to get them to respond to any kind of threat?
Secretary Warner, I see your hand. Go ahead.
What I'd highly recommend about this election night reporting and how long it's going to take and so forth. We're only 5 days into this election right now. September 18th was the earliest we could send ballots out. Already, my chief of staff has compiled a county by county tabulation. How many voters there are, how many people have requested an absentee ballot, how many absentee ballots have been sent out, and how many ballots have already been returned. And we're going to keep that up on a day-by-day basis. So on election night, if in West Virginia, you're allowed to mail your ballot on election day as long as it's postmarked by election day. So there will be some ballots that come in legitimately a couple of days after. But if the difference between the candidates is so much is higher than the number of ballots that are out, the absentee ballots that are out, or the provisional ballots, and we'll know that soon after election night, then you can go ahead and declare victories. Okay. The trouble is when people aren't keeping tabs of that, and you don't have people being open with the press, and there's where you lose the confidence, and then all of a sudden ballots start magically appearing, and then some more appear, and so forth. that's when the violence or whatever potential increases dramatically. So that accurate accountability on a day-by-day basis of the requests, the ballots that go out, the ballots that come in, keeping track of that is absolutely essential to maintaining confidence in the elections. Thanks.
Well, we're almost at the end of our time, so what I want to do is just go around the horn, just to give all of you a chance to identify one idea, one thought, or comment you want to leave our audience with as we head into the final 41 days of the election season. So, David, I'll start with you.
Thanks. Just as my dogs were going a little bit crazy at perfect timing. So I think I'd want to stress what I've stressed before. We are 41 days out. We are going to have 150 million or more Americans try to and want to vote in this election, in an election in which people have very, very strong passions. And we have very, very committed and sophisticated foreign adversaries who want us all to doubt the election outcome, want to split the country, want there to be no answer, want it to take as long as possible. I think the most important thing is to stay strategically focused. The health of our democracy depends upon the confidence in the electorate that, frankly, people like Mac and Michael, that the job that they're doing and doing so well. I work with election officials all across the country. I work with Republicans. I work with Democrats. I can't name one that is trying to put their thumb on the scale to achieve a particular election outcome. Sure, we see partisans in the legislatures and in Congress doing that sometimes, but the election professionals, they are not. And we have everything we do, whether you're a member of the media and reporting stories out. Literally while I'm on, I'm seeing stories being reported about how the election is going to be a complete meltdown, how votes aren't going to matter, how election technology can't be trusted. Those are not helpful stories right now. If you have policy prescriptions that you want to pursue, 2021 is a great time to do them. But for now, let's help voters navigate the process. Let's do everything we can to get them to vote in a way that's maximized for success. That means voting early, planning to vote early, figuring out what the best method to vote for each individual voter is. And if we focus on that, I think we'll come out of this okay, thanks to the professionals who are running elections all across the country.
Michael, I'm going to toss it to you.
Thank you. Again, to reiterate, have an emergency contact list. Make sure you're ready to call whoever you need to call, no matter what happens, as part of your, incident response plan. Take a look at your online presence. Make sure that it's secure. So take an inventory of all your social media accounts. Take a review of all the account security on your social media. If you're not doing multi-factor, can you implement it? That might be difficult if multiple people need to access your Twitter or your Facebook, but can you securely share the passwords? Can you update the passwords to something longer and more secure that perhaps doesn't have 2020 or elections in the password, on and around election day? Make sure you're monitoring your own social media and make sure there's nothing weird that's popping up on it. Other than that, make sure that you have a means for reporting disinformation.
Thank you. Maria?
Thanks. So I think everything that has been shared is exactly accurate and what we should be thinking about. I will say kind of three things that I'll leave you with is we know that the threat is real in terms of malicious actors seeking to cast doubt on the integrity of the election process, of trying to stoke divisions of how we talk to each other, like real issues that we care about as a country are being used as a part of these tactics to further divide us. That being said, I think there's also some research indicates there's an intent that that the perception that would be ideal for some malicious actors is that the chaos being created by these this kind of distorted conversation from these incidents then will cast doubt on if our process even works. And I will echo what David said. In our work, we're a bipartisan project. We have the chance to see how much time and effort is being put into maintaining the integrity of the election. from election officials, from other stakeholders in the democratic process. And it's something that I see so strongly. So I feel like that is the element of hope, that there are so many people invested in the fact that, you know, this is key to our democracy. And despite these threats, we have elements of resilience, and we will be resilient in this process. We just have to understand these threats more clearly and know how they are trying to cast doubt, and know what kind of questions we should be asking to better understand. So the third thing I will say is, you know, if you're somebody who's in a position to be a validator for election officials in your area, in your state, find a way to connect, whether it's online, whether it's, you know, through email, through phone, and find a way to best be able to share information that they have to elevate and make sure that to get accurate information out. And equally, if you're in a position where you're able to report to them, talk with them about how best to exchange. If you're a voter, similarly, think about who is the kind of election administration head in your jurisdiction, and find information ahead of time. Make your voting plan, is what I've been hearing my colleagues in this space say, and look for authoritative sources, trusted sources of information, so that you can verify information you're seeing, whether it's on social media or elsewhere, that might impact your voting plan. So I will also post in the link, in the chat, some of the links I've referenced for the playbooks. Although many of them are written for election officials, we also hope that they're a helpful reference for people who want to support the process or to better understand these threats. So we hope they're helpful to you as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. And Secretary Warner, to you.
ESPN has a series 30 for 30, and then there was the Michael Jordan series a while back. And some of the best programs were about these teams that were had high degrees of talent, individuals, but they didn't necessarily win the championship. Sometimes teams with lesser talent that played together better were the ones that persevered and what took home the trophies at the end of the season. What we've seen here between 2016 and 2020 is we have a lot of the same players on the field, secretaries and IT specialists and so forth. But right now, we have stepped up the game by orders of magnitude. We are playing together now. We are coordinating. We are talking. The protocols are in place. David mentioned earlier the EISAC and tools such as that. DHS, the personnel have changed. The people with election experience in there that understand the importance. There was this concern in 2016, we can't talk about those two counties in Florida. It may be politically, unsettling and so forth. And we went through some real dialogue. Should we talk about when there's an IT threat or not, if you've been hacked or held for ransomware and so forth? Now I think some of those walls have come down, those barriers, and we're more likely to talk about it because we understand what the others gain from our experiences. No matter how many Michael Moores we have out there, if the Russians really want to focus on Maricopa County, they're going to find a way in. And it's not Michael Moore's fault. It's just a nation state going against a county in the United States. And so I think some of that concern over being exposed when you get targeted has come down, and we're much more likely to share information now. And we have the protocols in place, the tools, the three-lettered agencies, and things such as the ISAC, GCC, all these different means of communication to share our concerns. So I think we're in a much better position now than we have been. That's the message that we're spreading today. We need to spread for the next 41 days so people have confidence. It's a matter of doing just what Route 50 is doing, giving us this forum to talk with folks so that they understand what is going on. It's like that duck paddling underwater. It may seem calm on the outside, but underneath, we're all just paddling like hell to make this election work. We got through a primary. We got through some tough primaries with something that the world has never seen before to this order of magnitude right during election time. I think we're all going to do just fine during this general election. We hold it together. I've worked with many of these professionals out there across the U.S. I'm like David. I haven't seen any one of them that's trying to undermine the system. We're all in this together. That's the beauty of this system. It's not a Republican, a Democrat, a progressive, conservative, or liberal thing. This is an American democracy thing. We're all in it together, and love to see the leadership of places like Harvard stepping into the middle of this and providing a forum. I'm sure they'll probably have an after-action report like they have had in the past after this election to see what went right, what went wrong, share it so that we can all learn from that. Again, thanks to you all for putting this on. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Secretary Warner. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, David, for a wonderful conversation. Well, we've reached the end of this panel, but don't go anywhere. I'm now going to introduce Rob Forbes, Senior Solutions Architect at Okta, for a session presented by our underwriter, Okta. Rob, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen in just one moment. I'm Rob Forbes. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect with Okta. I've been doing IT security for 30 plus years, working at fun places like Headquarters Air Force on this thing called Milnet before we had an internet. So kind of been around doing this for quite some time. Thanks to the panelists, great insightful content and very wonderful conversation for everyone. I still don't have the rights to share. If you could make me the presenter, I'll just pop up. We're just going to step through, talk a little about securing your systems, what you can do now, what you can do long term, some of the things that you need to be able to handle. There we go. Let me just share that. So, as I said, I'm a Senior Solutions Architect with Okta. We're an identity management platform enabling organizations to help manage the access of their users to the systems and the infrastructure, including their the end constituents as well. This is rather obvious, but we always miss the obvious sometimes, but don't fail to plan. Don't stop to think about what you're doing for this cycle and for coming cycles. You want to make sure that everything you're doing, you're thinking big picture. You're thinking, what do I need to do? What are the basics I need to do? What are the things I need to do not only for this cycle, but for the next election cycle as we move forward? So as we think about it, it's always the fundamentals. It's that just keep it simple process. Are my systems there? Are they scalable? Are they going to be able to handle my loads, but not just my normal loads, but peak load hours? 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock when everything's spiking and people are coming in and people are voting, and I've got volunteers logging into systems, and I've got contractors and temporary folks getting into the systems. Are my systems highly available? Do I have those systems? Are they capable if it starts to overload? If the system crashes due to load, do I have a backup system that's ready? Have I tested it? Am I good to go there? My security patches in place, not just my OS patches, but my databases and my applications that are running everything. Do I have those up to date? Am I ready to go with those? So those take some time to get in place. Sometimes you have to work with a vendor to make sure that their application supports those latest patches. But again, these threats against the systems and the core infrastructure on the backside by these nation states are going to look for these simple things. Phishing and vishing training, have I gone through all my employees and even my volunteers and temporary contract workers to make sure this is the number one target is going after folks, and as Michael mentioned, talking about password vaults and credential vaults, is going after these people to gain that access. So have I trained folks and refreshed them to make sure they understand, hey, we're not going to call you up and say, hey, account, give me your information, let me log in and test it or check it. Make sure people are aware of those vectors and how that attack surface is going to impact you and those folks working the elections on those days and coming up to those days to make sure those systems stay secure. Do I have full logging of all the access? Who's logging in when? Are those things being tracked? Do I have an audit trail? We talk about the ability to make sure there's confidence in the system. So who was logged into that system? If there were problems, and we do have to go back and look at it, who was logging into that application, who was logging into the backend database, who was logging into which systems when? So do I have that logging? Is my logging going to scale again with the process of the scaling and the thought around the scaling there? So make sure that you've got these fundamental things in place to be able to go off and ensure, in this cycle, these are some things that you can make sure that you've got ready and in place. A little bit longer term and maybe a little bit higher depth, how are you going to provision those temporary and volunteer workers? Are they logging into your systems? How do I get them in there? What's the process for getting them in there? Am I logging them in and setting up on internal networks and systems, or do they have access to external systems? Can I use something like Federation to bring them in without storing those people in my internal networks and bring them in? Not only how am I going to log them in or provision them initially, how am I going to deprovision them? I've got to get those folks back out of the systems after they're done working on those systems. If I've brought contractors on to come help me monitor the systems and stuff, I need to take those folks off, the volunteers that might be logging into an app or a web app or a mobile app to get in the system. How do I get them off? Multi-factor authentication, Michael pointed this one out. This is a great one for a good way to, ensure who's logging in. So if there are phishing attempts against the individuals that are working on your systems, do you have multi-factor so they can get, strongly authenticated to it, including on a credential vault system? If my password gets compromised and I've got access to the credential vault and somebody gets in there and I don't have multi-factor, the credential vault does me very little good. And typically you can get a multi-factor platform in place, tied into a lot of systems pretty quickly. And it's a very front-facing step to solve some of these problems. Mobile apps, more and more, state level, federal level, local level places are leveraging mobile. They're giving folks iPads, they're using their phones, they're giving, tablets, Samsung tablets to folks to go connect in. Mobile applications have a whole different threat model around them. So is that application secure? Have we tested it? Do we understand how it's working, how it's connecting in? Am I using modern protocols or am I using legacy application style for those applications to get in? The mobile device trust. Again, these mobile devices are we letting people bring their own devices and use the mobile app off that mobile device? Is that device secure? Has it been jailbroken? Do I have policies to control which mobile devices can connect into my infrastructure so that as these folks are using them, I know that device is safe to be connecting in and doing those things. Zero trust. Zero trust is absolutely, the next phase in security that more and more organizations are going to. It's the principle around, I don't have access to everything all the time. I've only got access to what I need when I need it. So, doing things like eliminating, permanent access, passwords and keys and things like that, moving to ephemeral access models, passwordless access models, provisioning, deprovisioning on demand and on the fly so that access is there when I need it and then goes away when I don't need it. And that my applications, DevOps, all these applications are logging in, making updates, spinning up new servers. Those applications have access when they need it. It's taken away when they don't. Threat monitoring, you want to constantly be on the watch out for what things are going on across your systems and across statewide systems, and even some coordinations among those things would be awesome to be able to see, who's logging in as these actors are coming in and attempting to attack one network. They're not just attacking one, they're attacking all of them. They're spinning up these attacks across these networks. So, do I have visibility into what folks are doing? Do we have blacklists of IP addresses and bad actors that are coming across my network or the state's networks as a whole to make sure that we're seeing these attempts to go in and we're able to lock the networks down and shut them out so that folks can't get into those systems and do it. So, these are just some of the things that you want to look at and think about when you're looking at your systems and how you're going to secure them. The identity of the users and the identity that people play the key role in it, the identity of the applications, the identity of the devices, the identity is core to all of this. Who's accessing what, when, where, how. So you want to be able to, kind of keep that in line with everything that you're doing moving forward. So these are just some of the base level systems and processes that you want to look at, not only for this cycle, but moving forward. So we want to thank everybody for attending. It's really been a great pleasure to talk to everybody and to see the interaction and all the great questions through the process. And we really look forward to being able to help you guys as you move forward in your endeavors.
Thank you, Rob, for providing those insights and helping illustrate how to best utilize technology to strengthen the security of this election. With that, we've reached the end of our time here today. I want to thank all of our speakers once again, and thank you, our audience, for joining us. And of course, a huge thanks to Okta for making this conversation possible. As a reminder, this digital event has been recorded, excuse me, and will be available on demand on the event website. You'll also be receiving the recording via email, and we encourage you to pass it along to your colleagues. As always, we thank you for joining us today, and we hope you've had a wonderful time. See you next time.